fantasy season. What's going on, fantasy football freaks and football fans out there? It's Mitch, back with another fantasy football video, and in this video, I simply am going to do a mock draft and give you my thoughts and my flow for how I operate within a fantasy football draft and how I feel you should approach your drafts this fantasy football season. So if that sounds good, don't forget to spike the like button and subscribe for more fantasy football tips and tricks this offseason and throughout the 2024 NFL season. If you have any questions about my draft or any questions about my strategy entering the 2024 fantasy season, then just let me know in the comments and I'll definitely get back to you with my thoughts. Let's get to it, guys. Right here, we're going to start it. We're going to roll. We're going to have some fun picking some players and talking strategy. So let's begin. We have a 12-team PPR, obviously snake draft here on Sleeper. I don't know what pick I am, so it's going to be randomized, and I'm going to take the pick and strategize from there. So let's go. So it looks like I have pick number 11. McCaffrey, Lamb, Bijan at 3, Tyreek, Chase, Jefferson, St. Brown, Breece Hall, Nakua, and A.J. Brown. I have 2 minutes to pick and to talk through the process here. So the top players on Sleeper that are on the board: Jahmyr Gibbs, Garrett Wilson, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Marvin Harrison, Kyren Williams, Devontae Adams, Drake London, Sam Laporta. Okay? So this is a PPR league, 2 flexes, 2 receivers, 2 running backs. This is their standard on Sleeper, so I just rolled with it. My favorite pick right now, I think there's a clear tier gap, and this is how I would approach your drafts, especially in a PPR league with multiple flexes. You want to be able to fill those flexes most of the time with wide receivers. So that being said, we have a clear tier gap with one of my must-draft wide receivers for 2024, Garrett Wilson. So before I pick him, I'm going to pick Garrett Wilson, but I love him with Aaron Rodgers this year. He's the clear alpha target. Mike Williams will be in and out of the lineup as he always is. He's the chain mover. He's the red zone target. He's going to see a ton of volume. He's had the most targets to start an NFL career in NFL history. He's dangerous after the catch. He's got great hands. I think people are sleeping on just how good Garrett Wilson is as an all-around, well-rounded wide receiver who can play inside, outside. He's going to be Aaron Rodgers' guy. We've seen Aaron Rodgers work with alpha targets before, like Devontae Adams. So I think because Wilson is clearly the best receiver on the board and it's a tier gap, I have to pick Wilson here in a PPR league. So just going to set him right there, and we're going to go ahead and pick him. So there we go. So back-to-back running backs is interesting. Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor. That has been a strategy that I didn't exactly expect, but you're not always going to expect what your draft mates are going to be able to do. One thing that does help, if you've been in a league for a long time, is try to understand their previous drafts. If you have draft history in your league, on your website, wherever you're playing, Yahoo, Sleeper, wherever it is, check it out, guys, and make sure that you do just kind of look at any tendencies that have taken place in your league. If you're going into a league for the first time, obviously you don't have that benefit. Since we've gone with Garrett Wilson here, we're open to really go with any position because we've hit wide receiver. One of my favorite running backs to draft this offseason has been Kyren Williams, and I believe that he is an RB1 this year. Jahmyr Gibbs is somebody that I also like, but I think I like Kyren more just because he's going to get more work. I feel like he's going to get more red zone touches, more just overall workhorse role. I'm still a little bit worried about David Montgomery when it comes to Jahmyr Gibbs. I do think Gibbs is explosive, and he's kind of like Alvin Kamara in his prime with Mark Ingram. That's kind of how I think of him. But I feel like Williams could be a top 3, top 4 running back with that offense that's so potent. So either one of these I don't hate. Marvin Harrison is a rookie, but he's phenomenal. Devontae Adams, Drake London. I think I'm going to go with Kyren Williams here. My must-draft wide receiver, my must-draft running back, my second picks in both videos. I think this is a good way to start the draft. We go balanced, and then we can kind of approach the rest of the draft from there. So I'm going to go with Kyren Williams from the Rams as my pick in the second round. And that is actually a lot higher than where he goes in places like Underdog, where I've been drafting a majority of my drafts. And if you guys want to get really good at mock drafts, I would suggest playing best ball if you aren't already, because it really gets you ready at where players are going to go against real life opponents. This is not like an underdog thing. You can play on DraftKings. You can play anywhere that best ball is, Yahoo, I don't know, anywhere, FFPC, but it allows you to get ready for your drafts. And that's what I do the last couple of years, and I've had my most success in fantasy ever drafting a ton of best ball teams to get me ready for my actual leagues. So that it's just inherent. I just understand who I'm going to pick and what ranges, what value pockets there are, what positions are going to be ready. So now we see we've had 2 quarterbacks selected, we've had 2 tight ends selected, and right now it's been pretty balanced, but there's been a ton of receivers off the board in recent picks. Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes on Sleeper are the top-rated quarterbacks, which I wouldn't disagree with. I think, personally, I'd have Mahomes maybe a little bit ahead of Hurts, maybe. I think Allen is definitely my number 1 quarterback. I think Lamar would be my number 4. He's already gone, though, which is interesting. So I'd have Hurts and Mahomes ahead of Lamar in fantasy. DJ Moore is screaming at me right now. I really do like DJ Moore this year as the number 1 receiver. Cooper Kupp is still there. I like him. Malik Neighbors, Zay Flowers, Devontae Smith. At running back, we've got my guy James Cook, and I think we could come back and get him. So we might actually start double balanced here. Ooh, this is tough between DJ Moore and Cooper Kupp. I already have Kyron Williams on my team, which is something to consider, although I don't think that's a reason you should necessarily fade Cooper Kupp. That's only a reason maybe to build upon it. I'm going to go Cooper Kupp. I'm going to go Cooper Kupp here. I feel like if he's healthy, which all indications are that he is healthy, him and Nakua are going to get so much volume in a PPR league. When DJ Moore is competing with Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze and DeAndre Swift and Cole Kmet, it's just a little bit too much competition to pass up. I could double down with DJ Moore right here, which I very well might do. Malik Neighbors is also extremely enticing at this pick. I like DK Metcalf. I like Zay Flowers. There's still a ton of values at wide receiver right here. And we could get a running back that I think is going to finish locked and loaded as an RB1. And there's a clear gap between him and the next guy, in my opinion, which is James Cook. And the difference for me is James Cook's on a good offense, attached to a good quarterback with a good offensive line. Joe Mixon catches the ball less, is a little bit older. He's aging. I like Mixon, right? Alvin Kamara's on a terrible offense with a terrible offensive line despite his pass-catching role. I like Kenneth Walker as a talent, but I question his receiving upside. Aaron Jones is too injury-prone for my liking. And then my next favorite running back really would be like James Conner in terms of the value there. So I think I'm going to take James Cook. As much as I like DJ Moore, just looking at the board, and this is something you have to examine, Patrick Mahomes could also be a choice here because I think there's a gap between him and Stroud, but I'm not really into taking the quarterback at this spot. I think I'd rather secure a big-time running back who has 50-plus reception upside, 1,000-yard rushing upside. I think if the touchdowns go for James Cook, he's going to put up a massive season. So I'm going James Cook with my pick right here. So we've got 2 running backs, 2 receivers, 2 target monsters at receiver, Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, 2 guys that are going to be 3-down running backs for their awesome offenses. You'd expect an uptick in the Jets' offensive production as well. It's interesting that DJ Moore went right after we picked James Cook, which would indicate we were kind of in the right range of our picks. Mahomes went not far after. All the tight ends went on a run. That's something you have to be aware of, especially on the corner, is you have to be paying attention to the teams, a couple spots, in front of you and behind you to see what they already have, right? So, like, just for example, if I really wanted a quarterback here, and let's say I really wanted Anthony Richardson, there's no sense in me picking Anthony Richardson right now because Team 12 already has Jalen Hurts. So it doesn't make any sense for me to pick Anthony Richardson if I really wanted Anthony Richardson. Now, I'm not the biggest Anthony Richardson guy in the world, so I'm not really thinking about him at this spot. But that's just an example, okay? So, and given that we have a multi-flex format and not a 3-receiver, 1-flex format, it allows us to be kind of more flexible with our running back choices at the top of the draft. and a little bit less, inclined to pick a receiver. If it was a 3-receiver format with 2 running backs starting, I may have leaned towards DJ Moore. That's another point that has to be raised. So after that, the tight end position is kind of bare. So, at this point, I'm not going to chase it. I'm not going to reach for Evan Ingram. Wide receiver-wise, there's Keenan Allen. I didn't take DJ Moore. He's in the same offense. I don't mind Christian Kirk, especially in full PPR leagues. He is the target monster of his offense. Terry McLaurin is the number 1 receiver in Washington. Rome Odunze, not the biggest fan. I like Chris Godwin probably more than these other guys. At running back, I'm probably going to steer away. So really, I think I'm going to take Christian Kirk here. And the reason is, it's close between him and Terry McLaurin, and I might pick Terry McLaurin right here. So yeah, him and Terry McLaurin are very close for me. Keenan Allen, again, like age, injury concern. Rome Odunze, that's a weird pick. That's the computer for you sometimes, but I don't know why you would pick Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze back to back. I wouldn't do that personally. I think that's kind of strange. Also, I feel like, getting 4 number 1 receivers in their offenses, Terry McLaurin is clearly the number 1 receiver in his offense. That is pretty immense in this type of league, like a PPR league. So it's hard to pass up Terry McLaurin right here. Could I deviate to Anthony Richardson? I would be more inclined to deviate if I already had Michael Pittman on my team, if I had some sort of stack that made sense. Like, I don't have Jamar Chase, so Joe Burrow, a pocket passer, doesn't really make sense to me in this range of the draft. I love James Conner, but I do feel like we could get a very nice running back 3 with upside a little bit later. So I'm going to go with the number 1 receiver that I was contemplating at the last pick, Terry McLaurin. Now, I think Terry McLaurin's going to have a better season than he did last year. I still think he's a good player. It's just a matter of the offense, the volume, the difference in Cliff Kingsbury's attack. I think that he largely has funneled targets towards his wide receiver 1s like DeAndre Hopkins in Arizona. So I think Terry's a very solid pick, especially as a wide receiver 4. Christian Kirk, I just went with him over Terry McLaurin because I feel like the Trevor Lawrence difference between the unproven Jaden Daniels was the difference for me at that pick. So if Terry McLaurin would have went at, team 12, I maybe would have deviated towards, like, let's say Keenan Allen if he were still available, or I may have gone with who else was available at that point. I may have gone with potentially Rashee Rice, Chris Godwin, maybe James Conner. Those would have been my choices at that pick. So then we've got not much of a run at quarterback, only 1 tight end selected. So let's see who's at the top of the board. We're getting pretty interesting in this tight end range where you don't really want to miss out on a tight end. And since we're at the end of the draft, you also have to be aware of where to pick your tight ends, where to pick your quarterbacks, and, the tier gaps between these guys. I still feel like there's 4 capable starting tight ends here. Brock Bowers, David Njoku, who I love, Jake Ferguson, and Dallas Goedert. Now, Team 12 might be likely to take a tight end because they don't have one, but being that David Njoku would be my favorite target, he's ranked 85th, so you have to use your rankings to your advantage, especially the website rankings that you're drafting off of, to see maybe which tight end might be picked next, right? So that seems like it will be Brock Bowers. So I might just wait until the next pick to pick David Njoku. Running backs, Raheem Mostert, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Brooks. Not a huge fan of these guys, honestly. Wide receiver, quarterback, Kyler Murray is there, which is intriguing. Wide receiver, Hollywood Brown, Deontay Johnson. I'm going to go again with another receiver here. You can never have too many receivers. I'm going to go Deontay Johnson. So now we have 5. So that's our first bench player. I went with Deontay Johnson, and I was a little bit panicked there because I only had like 15 seconds because I was talking through strategy. It was between him and Christian Watson. I think Christian Watson has more upside, but Deontay Johnson he's again, another number 1 receiver. We're just stacking number 1 receivers here. And in PPR leagues, targets, volume is the king. And Deontay Johnson is a proven separator, a proven route runner. Bryce Young is going to see a better season this year with better protection, a better offensive coach that they brought in. I think Deontay's going to have his floor just seems very safe to me. Like, he is essentially, to me, Keenan Allen, except you're getting him a couple rounds later. Like, he's going to catch 90 passes this year pretty safely. Now, we could go Kyler or we could go Njoku, and that's kind of the question for me here. Do we go quarterback or do we go tight end? And I think overall, I tend to lean towards the tight end because I think there's more depth at quarterback. You can get away with a lesser quarterback, but you can't really get away with a lesser tight end. You're just chasing that position all season long. You're trying to trade for it. So I'm going to go with Njoku. Njoku was one of the best tight ends in the NFL over the last 10 weeks of the season. He was like, with Joe Flacco, he was like the second best tight end in all of fantasy. And he's a wicked athlete. He's a way better football player than given credit for. He is a demon after the catch. He's the best after the catch tight end in football right now. And he's the clear number 2 target in his offense behind Amari Cooper. So as long as Deshaun Watson is not a complete and utter disaster, Njoku should put up very solid tight end 1 numbers, and we're not really worried about that position all year long. So I really like Njoku. I would pick him over Brock Bowers. I would pick him over Ferguson. I would pick him over Evan Ingram this year. I think he's closer to Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews territory than he is to Brock Bowers. As much as I think Brock Bowers is a wicked prospect, I just feel like, not exactly that close because Bowers does have questions in kind of a bad quarterback-led offense with the Raiders. So quarterback is still there for us. Jared Goff, there's been a clear, tier gap here in quarterback play. Like, Jared Goff is a solid quarterback. I really like Matthew Stafford. So I think what we might do is we might wait for Matthew Stafford. I think he's extremely slept on in fantasy this year. We also have Kupp, which helps our stack possibilities. We have Trevor Lawrence to stack with Kirk. We have Daniels to stack with McLaurin. So at this point in the quarterback range, I'm just looking for stacks, to be honest with you. I'm looking to partner with good offenses. Now, running backs at this point are pretty desperate. I think that's the position we're going to go with. Tajee Spears is screaming at me, but Brian Robinson is as well. Those are 2 guys that really are screaming at me, as well as Chase Brown. Chase Brown is ranked really low, so I think we're going to get away with him potentially coming back to us at some point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Brian Robinson, who I feel very good about as a running back 3. Spears is competing with Pollard, who I actually have kind of risen on my take on Tony Pollard this year, given how he performed at the end of last year, and they paid him so much money. So I think there's going to be a split there. But the Washington Commanders only brought in Austin Eckler, who is completely washed. He cannot run at all. He is super slow, lacking explosion. Robinson is a better receiver than given credit for, and he's also going to see a ton of red zone touches because Cliff Kingsbury, that's what he does. He gives his running backs red zone touches. Think of James Conner leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns not that long ago. So I think Robinson is a sneaky pick, especially in the 9th round. I think that's outrageous. So right now we have 3 very capable starting running backs. We have 5 receivers that we can trust in our starting lineup on a weekly basis. And we have a tight end that is a game breaker. So I really like this team. Despite not having a quarterback, I feel like this is a very, very solid team right now. So I think we maybe, again, because Stafford is ranked so low, we could maybe go with 2 quarterbacks here. We could go Jared Goff and then maybe get Matt Stafford a little bit later. At the wide receiver position, you've got Sutton, you've got Dobbs, Samuel, Lockett, Mitchell, Shakir, Mike Williams, Palmer. I really like Palmer this year. Sutton, to me, is too high. Dobbs is not a huge fan of. Curtis Samuel's interesting. I think I'm going to semi-reach on the board here for Chase Brown. I'm going to take swings at running back considering, there's not too many running backs with RB2, RB1 type upside. Chase Brown plays with the Bengals. He is the far more talented player, in my opinion, over Zach Moss. He's got a receiving profile. He's explosive. Although that was deemed a reach on the board, especially once you get to round 9, round 10, round 11, you can't really be worrying about the rankings. You've just got to pick your dudes. And to me, Chase Brown was a must-draft running back for a reason. He's going to be out there on 3rd downs. He's going to be out there catching the football in 2-minute situations. He's great in the screen game. I think he could have, a borderline 1,000-yard 30 catch season. He's like kind of James Cook light. He's like James Cook last year. You know what I mean? Like James Cook, how we felt about him last year. That's kind of what he is. Tight ends, I'm not really worried about. Quarterback could definitely be a pick here. But you've kind of got to check wide receivers just to see, you know, I think right here we should go with our quarterback. So it would be between Trevor Lawrence and Matthew Stafford. Because we don't pick so far away, we have to kind of secure a quarterback of our choice. So this one's debatable between Lawrence and Stafford. I prefer the Rams offense. I really like, we could even maybe get both, honestly. And that might not be a bad shout. So let's go with, so we picked 9-11, 10-2. So we have the quick turn right here. So I'm just going to pick the guy that's higher on the list, Trevor Lawrence, and it should come back to us with Matthew Stafford, and we can double down at quarterback. So there we go. So we get both our quarterbacks of our choice. And this is a strategy that I've implemented in the past pretty frequently, is when I don't get a quarterback that's like a locked and loaded QB1. So let's say the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy, which is really like, to me, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar, Hurts. That's the top 4 clearly. Stroud, I would put in that conversation. Richardson feels pretty safe, although he's got injury concerns, right? Then Kyler, I feel really good about. I'd probably have him ahead of Richardson in my rankings. But yeah, to me, like 2 guys, like Trevor Lawrence could have his best season of his career pretty easily. First round rookie receiver, better offensive line with Mitch Morse added, good offensive coach and play caller in Doug Peterson, dealt with injury last year, but was on pace to have a good year last year before he got hurt. Stafford has Sean McVay, Puka Nacua, plus we got double stacks with both these guys. We got Kirk and we got Kupp. And just because this isn't best ball, stacks are still very valuable in fantasy football on a weekly basis. Let's say Stafford's playing Arizona. We could partner him up with Cooper Kupp in a week and win our week pretty easily if Stafford has 3 touchdowns and one of them's to Cooper Kupp, right? Trevor Lawrence is playing the Colts secondary one week and Kirk goes off. I mean, very easily we can rotate these quarterbacks, and very likely as well at this point in the draft, only one of them will hit at a top 12 rate. So we're just taking a dice roll at this point in the draft. Instead of using high capital on our quarterback, we're securing 2 guys that we like and 2 offenses that we like a little bit later in the draft, okay? So now we're done at quarterback. We don't have to worry about that. Running back, is there any high upside options? It doesn't really feel like, unless you go with like sort of a handcuff with upside like Ty Chandler, if you don't believe, I should say, in Aaron Jones. We could go with another tight end. That's kind of interesting, but I've got a pick here. I'm going to go with... I'm leaning between Jahan Dotson and Brandon Cooks. I'm going to go Brandon Cooks here. It's not a super high upside option, but I feel like he definitely could have been utilized better. And I didn't really want to double down with Washington receivers. I also have Robinson, so that would be kind of crazy. You know, you could have went with Wicks. You could have went with Pearsall for truly upside cases. Jalen Polk as well. We could also just pick him right now. But I also really like Javon Baker. So right here, I don't think I'm going to double down at tight end just because I feel like all these guys will be available on the waiver wire. Noah Fant's a guy that I kind of like. Tyler Conklin's a guy that's pretty safe to pick as a tight end. He'll see a lot of volume. Hunter Henry can have startable weeks. Isaiah Likely is a huge upside case, right? So right now we're kind of looking for upside with our final 2 picks. And depending on when your draft is, this is key end of the draft strategy. If your draft is further away from the start of the season, so let's say you're 2 weeks away from the start of the season and you draft 2 weeks away from the start of the season, don't pick a defense and a kicker. There's literally no point. There is no advantage to it. Just pick 2 high upside players. Like maybe you would go with Isaiah Likely if you don't feel comfortable in your tight end, because maybe Mark Andrews goes down in training camp with an injury. All of a sudden you have a tight end 1, right? Or running back, maybe you pick Ty Chandler because Aaron Jones is always beat up. Or maybe wide receiver, you go with a rookie like Jalen Polk, right? So to me, I'm just going to play that strategy through. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick Jalen Polk. As the first wide receiver selected by New England in the draft this year, he could be the wide receiver 1 for the Patriots. I mean, very well could be. It could be any of them, really, but I'm just taking a shot at the guy that they selected with the most draft capital. And he's a NFL ready receiver in a way that I feel like maybe Javon Baker isn't quite, despite his amazing training camp. But, either way, you could go with either one, really. Here, Tyler Algier is another one where, like, he's a handcuff, probably more valuable in a best ball format. If you have Bijan Robinson, he's probably a good pick. I'm not sure if I can actually pause this, but I would just talk about defenses and kickers. I'll talk about it at the end just in case, just for the sake of it. But in terms of the last pick here, I think we're just going to go with a high upside player, probably a receiver. Ricky Pearsall is probably a good pick, right? Just in the calendar right now. And I can talk about him a little bit. So Ricky Pearsall, first round pick by the 49ers at wide receiver. Brandon Ayuk might be traded any day now. So his value is at an all-time high. The Niners might trade for another receiver. That's very possible. But Pearsall is an incredible route runner with rare lateral quickness. Kyle Shanahan really likes his ability. He's got great hands. He's super tough. And he's an older prospect. He was like 24. He's 23 or 24, which means that he's ready for the NFL in terms of maturity. He's probably going to pick up the offense rather quickly. So if they do move on from Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall could be a great pick right here because I think he is NFL ready as a route runner. So I'm going to take him with the last pick and go with 2 rookies to end my draft. So that's our team right there, guys. So we didn't pick a kicker or a defense. We've got multiple quarterbacks to choose from. Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford on a weekly basis. And always, we could definitely drop one if one's not working out. Or if one's really, really awesome. Like, let's say Stafford's putting up 35 touchdowns this year with Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua, and Kyron Williams, which is very possible, right? We're heavily riding the Rams offense, by the way. But I love the Rams offense. So if that's the case, right? Like, if Stafford's a beast, we could just let go of Lawrence, pick up another player, right? Or if both of them are doing well, which is pretty rare, we could trade one, But our team ends up being Kyron Williams and James Cook, 2 of my must-draft running backs this year. I love both of them. They're both young. They're both in their prime. They're both on awesome offenses. They've got underrated offensive lines in front of them. We've got target monsters across our roster. Garrett Wilson with our first pick. Cooper Kupp with our third pick. David Njoku is a high upside tight end on a weekly basis because of his yak ability. Christian Kirk and Terry McLaurin are number 1 targets in their offenses. Deontay Johnson is number 1 target in his offense. Brian Robinson is an underrated gem a little bit later as an RB3 with like a floor. Chase Brown is a high upside RB4 with maybe a lower floor than somebody like Brian Robinson, but you combine them both and that makes for art in your fantasy team. Brandon Cooks, we just picked because we respect him, his career, the offense. He's the number 2 receiver in Dallas, which is a pretty good offense overall, and he could see more usage if Dallas's defense isn't quite as good as last year. Jalen Polk and Ricky Pearsall are the opposite of Cooks, high upside options at the end of our draft as rookies. They could easily be dropped, but they also could easily turn into like high volume targets in their offenses, especially Polk if he's the number 1 receiver in New England. So yeah, there's opportunity with both those guys and talent with both those guys and draft capital put into both of those guys. So in terms of the defenses, I just want to talk about before we get out of here. Defenses that I really like this year. I really like the Jets defense, if you can get them somehow. But again, I wouldn't reach on a defense at any point. I would be looking at the schedule. One thing that I do when I draft really late, and usually all my drafts are like a day or 2 before the season starts, is I'm looking for a week 1 matchup. Now, the Jets are obviously playing the Niners, so that isn't the best example. But let's say a team like Cincinnati. They're not a great defense, but they play the Patriots in week 1. They're 10-point favorites. That might not be a bad start in week 1, right? And then you can play the streaming route for the rest of the season, which typically you would do. The Chiefs play the Ravens, so that's a bit of a scary matchup for week 1. The Eagles play the Packers. That's a scary matchup for week 1. The Niners are a good defense all the time, but you know, the Jets aren't a bad matchup. That's one of those where if you're going to take a defense that you really like early, the Niners would make sense. I actually like the Steelers defense a ton this year, especially for fantasy purposes, because sacks and turnovers are going to be huge for them this year. Miami's a defense I would not draft. The Commanders are the worst defense I've ever seen, so I would never draft them. Tampa Bay makes no sense. Cleveland is a great defense, and they play, you know, kind of a shaky Dallas offensive line in week 1, so that's interesting. The Ravens play the Chiefs. I wouldn't be drafting them. Dallas plays the Browns, which isn't a terrible matchup. So overall, I'd be thinking about week 1 matchup, but I'd also be thinking about, you know, looking at people's defense rankings. You know, I actually rank all 32 defenses, the real life defenses, not fantasy, on my bottom line view channel. So if you want to check that video out specifically to see where I land with certain defenses, you know, I got the Browns at the top, the Jets second, the Steelers third, the Patriots are up there, the Chiefs are up there. The Patriots, the problem with them is their offense, but overall, they're not a bad defense. It's just that, you know, Buffalo could be pretty good in week 1. They play Arizona, which is, you know, you got to think about that week 1 matchup is all I'm saying. And then the kicker, you're just wanting to look for a kicker attached to a good offense. Look at their pass volume in terms of kicking, which coaches decide to kick instead of go for it. Some kickers are limited by the amount that, you know, their coach likes to go for it. So those are things to think about. But that's the draft, guys. I hope you enjoyed this mock draft and my thoughts and my process. If you did, make sure to spike the like button and subscribe for more OwnersBox fantasy tips and tricks just like this. It's Mitch. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. Peace.